Jesus' prophecies on the destruction of the temple, a historical account. The sun was setting over Jerusalem in the spring of 30 AD. The holy city still echoed with the intense confrontations that had pitted Jesus of Nazareth against the religious leaders throughout the day. As the last rays gilded the imposing stones of the temple, a small group of men approached it, their eyes raised to its majestic facade. "Teacher," said one of them, his gaze shining with admiration, "look at these massive stones. What magnificent buildings." Jesus turned to his disciples, his grave face contrasting with their enthusiasm. In a calm but firm voice, he uttered words that would shake their world. "You see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down." A stunned silence fell over the group. These words, spoken in the very shadow of the temple, would trigger a series of events that would mark the history of Christianity and Judaism for centuries to come. To grasp the significance of this prophecy, let's immerse ourselves in first-century Jerusalem. Herod's temple, an architectural marvel, dominated the city in all its splendor. Imagine a structure covering nearly 35 acres, its walls rising to over 100 feet, built with stones weighing up to 570 tons. Construction work, initiated by Herod the Great around 19 BC, wasn't even fully completed in Jesus' time. Thousands of workers and artisans were still working on its embellishment, making the temple a permanent construction site and an important economic driver for the city. But the temple was much more than just a building. It was the beating heart of the Jewish nation, the place where heaven and earth met. For Jews, it was there that God's very presence resided, in the innermost chamber called the Holy of Holies. Every day, thousands of pilgrims flocked, bringing their offerings and sacrifices. Priests bustled from morning to night, performing rituals prescribed by the law of Moses. The smell of incense and sacrifices, the sound of prayers and songs, constant coming and going of the faithful. All this made the temple a vibrant place of activity and devotion. The court of the Gentiles, a vast outer courtyard, was open to all, Jews and non-Jews alike. It was a place of meeting, debate, and commerce, where pilgrims, merchants, and money changers mingled. It was there that Jesus, a few days earlier, had caused a scandal by overturning the tables of the money changers, accusing the temple authorities of turning the house of prayer into a den of robbers. Troubled by Jesus' declaration, the disciples waited until they were alone with him to question him. They crossed the Kidron Valley and climbed the slopes of the Mount of Olives. From there, they had a breathtaking view of the city and the temple rising majestically on the other side of the valley. It was then that they asked the question that was burning on their lips. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus' answer went far beyond their initial question. He unrolled before them a striking tableau of the future, mixing prophecies about the destruction of the temple with apocalyptic visions of the end time. "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars," Jesus began. "See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pain." He also announced persecutions. "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another." These predictions were to be strikingly fulfilled in the following decade. Judea would experience a period of growing troubles, marked by tensions with Rome, internal conflicts, and natural disasters. Then Jesus gave a more specific sign. "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountain." This reference to the abomination of desolation evoked a painful memory for the Jews. In 167 BC, the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes had desecrated the temple by erecting a statue of Zeus and sacrificing pigs there. This sacrilegious act had triggered the Maccabean revolt, whose victory was celebrated each year during the Feast of Hanukkah. Jesus seemed to be announcing that a similar event would be the sign that the destruction of the temple was imminent. He then advised his disciples to flee without delay. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. The urgency of these instructions suggested that events would unfold with lightning speed once the sign was given. Jesus didn't stop there. He went on to describe events of cosmic proportion. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. This apocalyptic language, familiar to Jews of the time, evoked a divine judgment that would affect not only the earth, the entire universe. Jesus seemed to link the destruction of the temple to events of universal and eschatological scope. After giving all these signs, Jesus made a surprising statement. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, Father only. This affirmation of ignorance, coming from the one whom his disciples considered the Messiah, must have left them perplexed. It emphasized the impossibility of predicting precisely when these events would occur and called for constant vigilance. Jesus illustrated this point with several parables, notably that of the homeowner who doesn't know when the thief will come, and that of the 10 virgins waiting for the bridegroom. The message was clear. His disciples should be constantly ready, living each day as if it were the last, while being prepared for a long wait. The decades following Jesus' death and resurrection saw the situation in Judea gradually deteriorate. Tensions between the Jews and their Roman occupiers intensified, fueled by religious zeal and messianic hopes. In 44 AD, Emperor Claudius attempted to install his statue in the temple, painfully recalling the episode of Antiochus Epiphanes. The violent reaction of the Jews made him back down, but the incident increased tensions. Under Nero's reign, the situation became explosive. Roman procurators, like Felix and Festus, proved particularly corrupt and brutal. Resistance movements, such as the Sicarii, led by zealots, multiplied violent actions against Romans and collaborating Jews. In 66 AD, the procurator Gessius Florus provoked a riot by taking 17 talents from the temple treasury. The revolt broke out in Jerusalem. Jewish insurgents initially managed to drive the Romans out of the city. Cestius Gallus, the governor of Syria, attempted to retake the city with the 12th Legion but was repelled. This unexpected victory convinced many Jews that God was on their side and that the time had come to shake off the Roman yoke. But the empire could not tolerate such a rebellion. Nero entrusted Vespasian, an experienced general, with the mission of quelling the revolt. In 67, Vespasian began a methodical campaign, subduing Galilee and then Judea. In 69, while Vespasian was recalled to Rome to become emperor, his son Titus took command of operations. In the spring of 70, he laid siege to Jerusalem with an army of 60,000 men. The siege lasted several months. Inside the city, the situation quickly became catastrophic. Famine set in, exacerbated by infighting between rival Jewish factions who destroyed food reserves. Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian who witnessed the events, left us a poignant account of those terrible days. The streets were strewn with the bodies of people who had died of starvation. Children and young people, swollen, wandered like specters in public squares and fell dead where fate struck them. Finally, in August 70, the Roman legions stormed the city. On the 9th of the month of Av in the Jewish calendar, a date that coincided with the anniversary of the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BC, the temple was set on fire. Josephus recounts how, despite Titus' orders to preserve the temple, one of the soldiers, without waiting for any command, and with no dread of so momentous a deed, but urged on by some supernatural force, snatched a blazing piece of wood and, hoisted up by one of his fellow soldiers, hurled the fiery brand through a low golden window that gave access to the rooms that surrounded the sanctuary on the north side. The temple, heart of the Jewish nation, was reduced to ashes. The survivors were sold as slaves or taken to Rome to adorn Titus's triumph. Jesus' prophecy had been fulfilled literally. Not one stone was left upon another of the magnificent edifice. The destruction of the temple was an unprecedented trauma for the Jewish people. The center of their religious life, the place where God dwelt among his people, had disappeared. How could they maintain their identity and faith without the temple and its sacrifices? This was the beginning of a radical transformation of Judaism. Under the leadership of rabbis like Yohanan ben Zakkai, who is said to have escaped from Jerusalem hidden in a coffin, Judaism reinvented itself. The study of Torah and prayer replaced sacrifice. The synagogue took the place of the temple as the center of community life. It was from this period that Rabbinic Judaism was born, which would allow the Jewish people to survive the loss of their homeland and their temple. Christians, the destruction of the temple had an equally profound impact. It was perceived as a striking confirmation of Jesus' prophecies, strengthening their faith in his messiahship and his imminent return. According to Christian tradition, many Christians in Jerusalem, remembering Jesus' warning, fled the city before the siege, finding refuge in the city of Pella in Transjordan. This tradition, whether historically accurate or not, testifies to the importance that early Christians attached to Jesus' words about the destruction of the temple. The fall of Jerusalem also accelerated the separation between Christianity and Judaism. With the disappearance of the temple, Jewish Christians no longer had reason to continue participating in sacrifices. Christianity increasingly asserted itself as a distinct religion, centered not on the Temple of Jerusalem, but on the person of Jesus Christ, the new temple, where God meets humanity. Nearly 2,000 years after these events, Jesus' words about the destruction of the temple continue to fascinate and challenge us. For historians, they raise intriguing questions. Did Jesus really predict the destruction of the temple with such precision? Or were his words reformulated after the events to correspond to what had happened? For believers, these prophecies remain a source of reflection and inspiration. They remind us that even the most sacred institutions are temporal in the face of God's eternity. They invite us to a faith that does not cling to external structures, but to a living relationship with God. Jesus' warnings about false messiahs and false doctrines still resonate in a world where voices claiming to speak in God's name are numerous and sometimes contradictory. His call for vigilance and perseverance remains relevant in the face of the challenges believers encounter. The destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem has not remained confined to the pages of ancient history. It has left lasting traces in the collective consciousness, both Jewish and Christian, and continues to influence our understanding of the sacred and the profane. For the Jewish people, the loss of the temple remains an open wound. Every year during the fast of Tisha B'Av, Jews around the world commemorate the destruction of the first and second temples. In Jerusalem, one can still see pious Jews praying at the Western Wall, the last remnant of the temple complex. The prayer, "Next year in Jerusalem," recited at the end of the Passover meal, expresses the ever-living hope of seeing the temple rebuilt one day. On the Christian side, the destruction of the temple has long been interpreted as confirmation that the Old Covenant had given way to the new, centered on Jesus Christ. This interpretation, largely questioned today, unfortunately fueled Christian anti-Semitism for centuries. More recently, Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of the temple has taken on new significance in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Temple Mount, site of the ancient Jewish temple, and now occupied by the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is at the heart of tensions between Jews and Muslims. Some Jewish messianic groups dream of rebuilding the temple, while Christian apocalyptic movements see the tensions around this place as a sign of the imminent end times. Beyond these political and theological considerations, Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of the temple invites us to a more personal reflection. In a world where changes are accelerating, where institutions once thought immutable are collapsing, where ancient certainties are being questioned, Jesus' words resonate with renewed relevance. They remind us that nothing in this world is permanent, not even the most sacred buildings or the most venerable traditions. They invite us to build our lives on foundations more solid than the stones of the temple, on truths that transcend the vagaries of history. At the same time, the way Judaism and Christianity survived the catastrophe of the temple's destruction offers us a lesson in hope and resilient. Faced with the collapse of their world, they were able to reinvent themselves, find new ways to express their faith, and live their relationship with God. It is a powerful testimony to the human spirit's ability to find meaning and purpose, even amidst ruins. The story of Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of the temple is a narrative where history and prophecy, particular and the universal, intertwine in fascinating ways. On one side, we have well-documented historical events: Jesus' preaching, the growing tensions in Judea, the Jewish revolt, the siege of Jerusalem, and the destruction of the temple. These facts are part of the fabric of ancient Near Eastern history and have had lasting consequences on the development of Judaism and Christianity. On the other side, we have prophetic words that seem to go beyond the scope of these historical events, pointing to a vaster and more mysterious reality. Jesus' apocalyptic visions, with their images of the end of the world and cosmic judgment, continue to intrigue and inspire. This tension between history and prophecy, between the already accomplished and the not yet realized, is at the heart of the Christian faith. It invites a reading of history that remains open to divine intervention, while anchoring faith in concrete and verifiable events. Ultimately, whether one is a believer or not, the story of Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of the temple remains a fascinating narrative. It reminds us of the fragility of empires and human institutions in the face of historical forces. It testifies to the remarkable ability of Judaism and Christianity to survive and reinvent themselves in the face of catastrophes that could have annihilated. And it continues to challenge us about the meaning of history and our place in the great narrative of humanity. As the sun sets on the ruins of the temple, nearly 2,000 years after its destruction, Jesus' words continue to resonate, inviting us to reflect on what is truly permanent and what is passing in our lives and in our world. In a world where prophets of doom and sellers of easy certainties are not lacking, the story of Jesus' prophecy offers us a middle way. It invites us to take the upheavals of history seriously, without losing hope. It encourages us to remain vigilant and prepared, while reminding us that the essential often escapes our calculations and predictions. Perhaps therein lies the ultimate wisdom of this story. In this tension between the acute awareness of the fragility of all things and the unshakable confidence in a reality that transcends time and space. Wisdom that our world, today more than ever, desperately needs.